It was just after dark. I was coming in from a long day of DoorDash deliveries, my arms still sore from carrying food up endless flights of stairs. Vanessa was already in the living room, and from the look on her face, it was clear she was in a bad mood, which, these days, seemed to be more often than not. She was at the counter washing down some Smirnoff, and just like her moods, that had become, well, a common occurrence too. I sighed setting my bag down, and I tried to brace myself for whatever storm was brewing tonight. "You're late again," Vanessa muttered, not even looking up from her drink. Her words weren't loud, but they carried that sharp edge I'd come to recognize all too well. I swallowed hard, forcing a casual shrug. Yeah, another late night, another delivery. What else is new? I set my bag down quietly, hoping to slip past the storm brewing in her eyes without making it worse. "You think you can just waltz in here and act like everything's fine?" she snapped, setting her empty glass down a little too hard. "Do you even notice how much I do around here? How much I put up with?" I froze for a second, trying to think of something to say, but the words stuck. "Yeah, I notice. I just don't know how to say it without setting her off." Her gaze bore into me, sharp and unforgiving. "You're always tired, always distracted, always failing. Sometimes I wonder if you're even trying to be a real man." I looked down at my hands, gripping the straps of my bag a little too tightly. A real man? The words stung, but they weren't new. I'd heard them in different ways, in different forms, for months now. Still, tonight they cut a little deeper. "I'm trying," I muttered, almost under my breath, but Vanessa heard me. "Trying?" she scoffed, her laugh sharp and cold. "Trying isn't enough anymore. You're always going to be stuck in the same place. That's just who you are." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I didn't have it in me tonight. Instead, I dropped my bag completely and let out a slow, shaky breath. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am just stuck. Vanessa took another sip of her drink, her eyes scanning me like she was looking for any crack, any weakness to pick at next. I could feel the weight of her stare pressing down on me, and I retreated into the quiet corner of my mind, trying to remind myself that this wasn't permanent, that somewhere, somehow, there had to be a way out of this storm. After what felt like hours of pacing my thoughts, I finally crawled into bed. The mattress sagged in the middle, a familiar reminder that it had seen better days. Just like me, I thought bitterly. Vanessa wasn't in bed yet. I could hear the faint clink of her glass from the living room, the occasional sip breaking the quiet, like a small explosion in my head. I stared at the ceiling, eyes wide, mind racing. Why is this always me? Why can't anything go right? I tried counting sheep, tried focusing on breathing, tried telling myself that tomorrow would be better, but nothing worked. The clock ticked too loudly, each second a reminder that I was alone in my thoughts. Finally, I heard the bedroom door creak. Vanessa stumbled in, a faint swish of fabric and the smell of alcohol clinging to her. She muttered a half-hearted good night and collapsed onto her side of the bed without looking at me. I could feel the distance between us and the mattress itself, a cold, physical reminder of how apart we had become. I lay there, staring at the wall, the faint hum of the street outside mixing with the low thrum of my own thoughts. How did it get this bad? I asked myself over and over, running through every mistake, every failure, every late delivery, every time I felt small in her eyes. Sleep didn't come. I just lay there, thinking, turning, staring, waiting for the storm to pass, or for something to change. Morning came too quickly, though it didn't feel like rest had followed the night. I stirred awake to the soft gray light creeping through the blinds, expecting to hear the familiar shuffle of Vanessa getting ready. But the room was quiet. No hustle of clothing, no clink of coffee cups. Her side of the bed was cold, untouched. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, and glanced around. Vanessa's side of the bed was empty. She had gone. No note, no whispered, "Have a good day." Just gone. Off to her office job like I didn't exist. I exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and frustration tightening in my chest. Of course, I thought bitterly. Why would she say goodbye? Why would she acknowledge me at all? I swung my legs over the side of the bed, letting my feet touch the floor, and stared at the small, cluttered apartment. Empty coffee mugs, scattered mail, and the faint, lingering scent of last night's alcohol reminded me that I was still here, stuck in the same routine. Maybe today will be different, I told myself, though I didn't really believe it. I knew the workday would be long, the deliveries endless, and Vanessa would return tonight with the same sharp words, the same criticism, the same weight pressing down on me. I dragged myself into the kitchen, my stomach growling even though I hadn't really felt hungry last night. The apartment felt emptier than usual without Vanessa's presence, and the silence pressed down on me in a way that made me ache. I poured a cup of instant coffee, the bitter smell doing little to wake me up, and I leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the quiet street below. Why does it always feel like I'm invisible? I asked myself again, tracing a crack in the countertop with my fingers. She hadn't even left a note or a word for me, like I was some afterthought, some background character in her perfect little life. The clock ticked steadily, mocking me, and I felt the familiar mix of exhaustion and frustration settle in my chest. Another day of deliveries, another day of being ignored and criticized. I rubbed my face, trying to shake off the heaviness, but it clung to me stubbornly. I grabbed my jacket and my bag, ready to head out, when a small flicker of thought crossed my mind. Maybe today I'll see someone who actually notices me. The idea made my chest tighten, a mix of hope and guilt swirling together. I shook my head, trying to push it away. Not yet. Not now. Stepping out the door, the morning air hit me. A small relief from the still apartment. The city was waking up. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional shout cutting through the quiet. I started walking, delivering food, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of the day, hoping the night's weight would fade, though deep down, I knew it wouldn't. I dropped off my latest delivery, the bag feeling unusually heavy in my hands despite being mostly sandwiches and drinks. With nothing else pressing, I decided to swing by the cafe on the corner to pick up the next order. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in, the warm scent of coffee and baked goods wrapping around me like a small comfort. The place was busy, the baristas calling out orders in rapid succession, cups clattering against counters, steam hissing from the espresso machines. I leaned against the wall, checking my phone, waiting for the order to be ready. And then I saw her. Rose. She was standing near the counter, casually scrolling on her phone, a soft smile playing on her lips. I barely recognized her at first. Vanessa's best friend. Someone I'd known for years in passing suddenly seemed different, more grounded somehow, like she belonged here in this quiet, bustling corner of the world, while my own life felt like it was spinning out of control. I caught myself staring for a moment too long, heart thudding in my chest. She looked up, met my gaze, and for a brief second, the chaotic noise of the cafe faded. She smiled, just a simple, friendly smile, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of ease. The barista called out my order, breaking the moment, and I stepped forward trying to shake off the sudden nervous energy. It's just a coincidence, I told myself. She's just here. That's all. But as I picked up the bag and turned toward the door, I couldn't help but glance back one more time, and Rose was still smiling. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to say something. "Hey, Rose, right?" I kept my voice casual, though I felt it wobble slightly. She looked up from her phone and smiled again, a little brighter this time. "Yeah, Rob. Long time no see." "Yeah," I said, shrugging. "Haven't run into you in forever." I guess my stomach tightened with a mix of nerves and something else I couldn't quite name. She laughed softly, not mocking, just warm. "It's been a while. How have you been?" I paused, trying to sum up the months of struggle in one sentence. "Busy, DoorDash, you know. Trying to get by," I said, forcing a grin. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "DoorDash, huh? Sounds exhausting." There was genuine interest there, a subtle kindness that made my chest ache a little. I nodded, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just a fraction. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. What about you? Still at the office? She nodded, then tilted her head thoughtfully. Yeah, but I actually like it. Keeps me busy. Helps me keep my mind off drama, I guess. Her eyes flickered toward the counter, then back to me, a small smirk tugging at her lips. Anyway, your order's ready? I glanced at the barista and I picked up my bag, but I didn't move toward the door right away. I lingered, just a little, feeling the rare ease of talking to someone who didn't make me feel small. As I stepped out into the morning air, coffee in my hand, bag balanced on my arm, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about Vanessa. I was thinking about Rose. The rest of my deliveries went surprisingly smoothly. Each drop-off was met with polite smiles, a thank you, and even a few surprisingly generous tips. One customer handed me an extra $5 and said, "Thank you for getting this to me so fast," and I felt a little jolt of pride. It was strange, almost like the world had shifted in just a few hours. The exhaustion from last night, the weight of Vanessa's words, the gnawing sense of failure, they all seemed a little lighter. I couldn't stop thinking about Rose. Just seeing her, talking to her for a few minutes, it had done something I didn't expect. It made the day feel easier, like I wasn't invisible anymore, like maybe someone actually saw me for the first time for more than my failures. Even when I was walking from one apartment to the next, balancing bags and dodging cars, I caught myself smiling at little things. The way a dog wagged its tail at me, the sound of kids laughing on the sidewalk, even the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery. Normally, these things barely registered. Today, they felt good. By the time my last delivery was done, my bag empty and my phone buzzing with completed orders, I realized I hadn't thought about Vanessa once since I left the cafe. And for the first time in a long time, that felt liberating. When I returned home, the first thing I noticed was the smell of food. Dinner. Vanessa had cooked. My stomach twisted with a mix of hunger and cautious hope. For a brief moment, I let myself think tonight might actually be different. I sat my bag down and walked into the kitchen. The table was neatly set, the aroma of spices and cooked meat filling the apartment. "Wow, you cooked," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, though my heart lifted a little. Vanessa looked up from the stove, offering a small, tight smile. "Yeah," she said, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Figured it was time." I sat down, picking at the food, savoring the flavors for the first time in what felt like ages. I felt normal. Maybe tonight wouldn't be a storm. Maybe we could just eat and relax. But as I reached for my water glass, Vanessa set her utensils down and leaned back slightly, a serious expression settling over her features. "We need to talk," she said, her tone calm but heavy, the kind of calm that always meant something bad was coming. My stomach sank. "Okay," I muttered, unsure what to expect. She took a deep breath. "Rob, things between us, they're going to change. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. I've been thinking about what I need and about what you aren't giving me. From now on, things won't be the same." I froze my fork halfway to my mouth. "Wait, are you breaking up with me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though the fear and confusion in it felt loud enough to fill the room. Vanessa shook her head slowly, a calm, almost cruel smile tugging at her lips. "No," she said. "We're still together. You're still mine. In your place. But things are going to change, Rob." I blinked, not understanding at first. "Change? How?" She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, eyes cold but sharp. "You're not a real man," she said simply. "You've never been one. And since you can't give me what I need, I'll be bringing real men home." The words hit me like a physical blow. My stomach turned. My chest tightened, and for a moment I felt paralyzed. "You... what?" I managed to croak, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing. "Yes," she said, her tone deceptively casual, like she was announcing the weather. "They'll come over, we'll still be together, but you'll just watch and you'll endure it because that's your role now." I felt the room tilt around me. The dinner, the brief hope, the tiny flicker of relief from the day, all of it vanished in an instant. I sat there silent, trying to hold myself together while my mind raced, trying to figure out how I could survive this and whether I even wanted to. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. Well, you do pay half the bills, I said carefully. So it's your place too, but I won't be watching anything. I can't do that. Vanessa shrugged, tilting her head as if my objection barely mattered. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and there was a cold certainty in her tone. It doesn't matter if you do or not, Rob, she said simply. The fact is, men will be coming to see me, whether you like it or not. I felt a wave of disbelief and humiliation crash over me. My throat went dry, and I gripped the edge of the table so hard I thought my knuckles would crack. You can't be serious, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I am, she said, leaning back, sipping her drink as if this was just another ordinary announcement. You'll stay. You'll endure it. That's your part. And if you can't handle it, well, maybe that's just who you are. I sat there frozen, trying to process the words, trying to make sense of the storm she had just dropped into our home. My mind raced, searching for a way out, for a way to protect myself from the shame and pain I could already feel looming over me. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I grabbed a bottle from the cabinet, Vanessa's leftover Smirnoff, and poured myself a drink. Just one, I told myself. Just enough to blur the edges of the chaos in my head. I took a slow sip, the burn of the alcohol hitting me harder than I remembered, but I welcomed it. Anything to dull the weight pressing down on me. Anything to make her words feel a little less real. I retreated to the guest bedroom, my temporary refuge, closing the door behind me. The small bed sagged under me, nothing like the comfort of my own side of the main bed, but it was all I had tonight. I sat on the edge, holding the drink in my hand, letting the dim lamp cast long shadows across the room. How did it get like this? I asked myself again and again, replaying the conversation, her words, her cold certainty. My chest ached with a mixture of shame, anger, and disbelief. I stared at the wall, the ceiling, anywhere but at the main bedroom I no longer felt welcome in. Hours passed. I finished the drink, then poured another, then another, letting the alcohol blur the edges of my thoughts, and still I didn't sleep. I just sat there, locked away in the guest room, trying to make sense of the storm Vanessa had unleashed in my life, trying to figure out how I could survive it, or if surviving it was even possible. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. I collapsed onto the small guest bed, the burn of the alcohol still lingering in my throat, and I finally drifted into a fitful sleep. But it was short and restless, filled with fragmented dreams of Vanessa's words, her cold smile, and the humiliation that weighed on me like a stone. Morning came too quickly. I woke up with a pounding headache and a stiff back from the too small mattress. My eyes barely focused as I pulled on my jacket, the weight of the previous night pressing down on me. Coffee did little to help, and even the brief walk to the first delivery felt like I was trudging through mud. The day dragged on. Every door I knocked on, every bag I carried, every polite smile from a customer felt like it required an impossible effort. My body ached, my head throbbed, and the fatigue made it impossible to shake the lingering sting of Vanessa's words. Even small annoyances felt amplified, the corner cafe being out of a pastry I'd promised, traffic lights that seemed to stay red forever, a customer complaining about a late delivery. Everything was magnified, everything was heavier, and by the time I finished the last drop-off, I was physically and mentally drained. I trudged home, each step echoing the same thought. I have to make it through tonight, somehow. I trudged into the apartment, dragging my feet and hoping the night would be quieter than the day had been. To my surprise, I heard laughter before I even reached the living room. There was Rose, sitting comfortably on the couch, chatting and laughing with Vanessa. Her warmth and brightness seemed out of place in the tension-filled apartment. A small reminder of the world outside Vanessa's control. But I quickly remembered why she was here, and she had no idea what was going on. "Rob," Rose called out cheerfully as I entered. "How was your day?" Her smile was genuine, friendly, and for a moment, I almost forgot the storm I'd left behind. Vanessa, lounging nearby with a smirk, shot me a glance and said sharply, "Don't encourage him. It's not real work anyways." I froze mid-step, the words cutting deeper than I expected. Rose looked confused, her smile faltering slightly. She murmured, glancing between us, clearly unsure on how to react. I forced a smile, trying to mask the hurt and humiliation. It was fine, I said, my voice low, trying to sound casual. "Just fine? That's all I can manage right now." Vanessa chuckled softly, leaning back with a smug satisfaction. Fine? That's cute, she said. Go ahead and tell her, Rob. Tell her how much you love running around delivering food all day while I actually do real things. I swallowed hard, keeping my gaze fixed on the floor. Rose, oblivious to the cruel dynamics at play, laughed nervously, trying to change the subject, but the weight of Vanessa's words pressed down on me, and I realized just how impossible it would be to escape this night unscathed. I forced a small smile and nodded at Rose. It's good to see you, I said quietly, letting a tiny spark of warmth show through. Even a brief exchange like that felt like a lifeline after the day I'd had. After a few minutes, I muttered something about needing to unwind and headed toward the bathroom. The hot water in the shower was a welcome escape, washing away the sweat, fatigue, and the sharp sting of Vanessa's words from earlier. For a brief while, I let myself pretend the world outside the shower didn't exist, pretend that none of this was real. When I finally stepped out, towel around my waist, I noticed immediately that the apartment was quieter than before. Rose was gone. Vanessa was gone too. The living room was empty, the air heavy with silence, and for a moment, I felt that familiar pang of loneliness settle back over me. I leaned against the counter, dripping water onto the towel, and let out a long sigh. The fleeting warmth of connection with Rose, the small relief from the shower, and the hope I'd let myself feel, it all evaporated in the quiet of the apartment, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I was once again left alone, left to think, plan, and endure what was coming next. About 30 minutes later, I heard the door open. My stomach sank before I even saw who it was. Vanessa walked in, that same confident, cruel smile on her face. And behind her was a man I didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the same sharp office attire Vanessa always talked about. "This is Brian," she announced casually, as if introducing a coworker for a quick chat. My heart pounded in my chest. "He works with me at the office. I thought, why not spend some time together?" Before I could even respond, Vanessa and Brian were all over each other in the living room. She was laughing, leaning into him, her hands on his chest as he pulled her close. The warmth, the energy, the intimacy. It was like a spotlight had been thrown directly on me, highlighting every ounce of my helplessness. I stood frozen in the doorway, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to do something, anything. But Vanessa's calm, unbothered gaze met mine across the room, and I realized that was the point. This was my punishment, my humiliation. I gripped the edge of the counter for support, my chest tight, my stomach twisting with a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. My mind raced, searching for a way to process what I was seeing, knowing there was nothing I could do tonight. I had to endure it, just like she said. Morning came slowly, my head still pounding from the restless, tear-filled night. My body ached from the small guest bed, my mind heavy with memories I wished I could erase. I stepped out of the bedroom, expecting the apartment to be quiet, maybe even empty, but the smell of breakfast hit me almost immediately. Pancakes, eggs, and coffee. Vanessa was in the kitchen, humming softly as she moved around, flipping something in a pan like nothing had happened the night before. I froze in the doorway for a moment, unsure how to react. My chest tightened, the memories of last night pressing down on me again. She glanced up at me with a small, calm smile. "Morning," she said cheerfully, as if the chaos of yesterday never existed. "I made breakfast. Eat something before you leave for work." Her casual tone, her complete disregard for the pain she'd caused, hit me like a punch. I wanted to shout, to demand that she acknowledge what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for a plate. She continued humming, moving around the kitchen like it was any other morning, like I wasn't here, like last night's cruelty was nothing more than a shadow that didn't exist, and I realized with a sinking feeling, this was her calm, unbothered normalcy, was just another layer of what I had to endure. I quickly finished my breakfast, barely tasting it, my mind still tangled in the chaos of the night. Vanessa hummed softly behind me like nothing had happened, and I wanted nothing more than to escape. I grabbed my bag and jacket and headed out, starting my deliveries for the day. The morning dragged on, the usual grind of apartments, doorbells, and heavy bags weighing down both my body and my spirit. By the time lunch rolled around, my stomach protested, and I decided to do something for myself. I swung by an all-you-can-eat pizza buffet a few blocks from my usual route, hoping at least one part of the day could feel normal. I walked in, scanning the crowded room, and froze. Rose, of all people I could run into, there she was, sitting alone at a table with a slice of pizza in hand, a small frown on her face as she stared at her phone. My chest tightened, but for the first time today, it wasn't from exhaustion or humiliation. I walked over cautiously. "Hey, Rose," I said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. Her eyes widened, then softened when she recognized me. "Rob? Wow! What are the odds?" she said, her voice cheerful but tinged with hesitation. "I'm just grabbing lunch," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, but I noticed the way she avoided my eyes for a moment, the tension in her shoulders. You look like you have something on your mind." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Yeah, I do. I've got to tell you something difficult," she admitted, her voice low. I held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "I already know," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my tone. "About Brian and Vanessa." Her eyes widened in shock for a fraction of a second, then softened with understanding. I leaned back slightly, forcing a small smile. "Come on," I said, gesturing toward the empty side of my table. "Have lunch with me and I'll tell you all about it." Rose hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said, sliding her plate over. "I guess I can use a little company right now." And just like that, for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. Rose picked at her slice of pizza, her fork tapping slightly against the plate. "You know, I've been talking to this guy lately," she began, her voice quiet, a little tense. "And, well, he just posted pictures with another woman. I don't even know what to think." I listened, nodding slowly. "I'm sorry, Rose," I said softly. That really sucks." She shrugged, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, it does, but I don't know. Maybe it's his loss, right?" Her words lingered in the air for a moment before she pivoted, her tone shifting as she glanced at me. "But enough about me. How are you holding up with everything going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "It's rough. Vanessa, well, it's complicated," I said, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I met her eyes, hoping she could sense the frustration, the humiliation, and the exhaustion I've been carrying. Rose leaned in slightly, waiting for me to continue. I let out a bitter chuckle, shaking my head slightly. "Honestly, that guy who ditched you, he's really missing out if he chose to be with another woman over you. He doesn't know what he's given up. He doesn't know what he's missing." Rose's eyes softened, a small grateful smile forming on her lips. "Thanks, Rob. It means a lot to hear you say that," she murmured. "Some people just don't see it until it's too late." I leaned back slightly, letting a pause hang between us. Then I gave a small, resigned shrug. "But enough about him. You should know I've been dealing with my own mess. Vanessa, well, it's a lot. And you deserve to know. I've been dealing with stuff I didn't ask for either." Rose leaned in closer, listening intently as I began to recount the events of the night before. I told her about how Vanessa had brought Brian over, how she had been herself, and how I'd been forced to endure it in the guest bedroom, powerless to stop any of it. I explained the humiliation, the anger, and the exhaustion that had carried over into the morning. Her eyes widened as I spoke, her fork pausing midair. "Wait, you mean in your own apartment?" she asked softly, disbelief creeping into her voice. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, last night, everything happened right there, while I could do nothing but watch and deal with it. I don't even know how I made it through the night." She shook her head slightly, a mix of shock and sympathy on her face. "I mean, I see her at the office sometimes, and she's difficult, sure," she said slowly, "but I had no idea she'd do that to someone she's supposedly with. That's that's cruel, Rob. I can't believe you had to go through that." I gave a small, bitter smile. "Yeah, it's been rough, but telling you helps a little. It's the first time I've shared it with anyone." Rose nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded around us, and it felt like just the two of us, sharing the weight of our own messy lives, her heartbreak and my humiliation, finding a strange, comforting connection in the middle of it all. For the next couple of weeks, the same pattern continued. Vanessa would come home with the new man from the office, laughing, flirting, and making sure I saw everything. At first it stung, the humiliation, the anger, the sense of helplessness. But after that lunch with Rose, it didn't hit me the same way anymore. With each passing day, I felt the edges of the pain dulling. I still endured it, still watched it happen, but the sharp edge of shame and despair started to fade. It was like a switch slowly flipped in my mind. She was no longer the center of my world, no longer the person whose actions defined my happiness. Eventually, I realized I didn't care anymore. I could feel something shifting inside me, a quiet detachment that was both freeing and strange. Vanessa was just a roommate to me now, a presence in the apartment, but no longer someone who could control my emotions. I went about my days differently, lighter somehow, noticing small things I'd ignored before. The way the sunlight hit the kitchen in the morning, the little sounds of the city outside, even the fleeting moments of humor Vanessa unknowingly offered. I was no longer trapped in her cruelty. I was simply observing it. And while Vanessa was still arrogant, demanding, and self-absorbed, I felt a quiet sense of control returning to my life. She didn't define me anymore. I was beginning to exist for myself, and the world, for the first time in months, felt like it might actually have room for something better. One day, after a particularly long shift, I came home to find Vanessa in the shower, humming loudly as if the world outside the bathroom didn't exist. The apartment felt quiet, empty in a way that invited opportunity. I wandered into the living room, my eyes falling on Vanessa's phone resting on the counter. I hesitated for a moment, a pang of guilt passing through me. But then I reminded myself, I wasn't snooping to hurt anyone. I wasn't looking for secrets or trying to stir trouble. I only had one purpose in mind. Carefully, I picked up the phone and unlocked it. My fingers moved quickly, deliberately, navigating through contacts until I found her. Rose. I didn't scroll through text. I didn't open pictures. None of that mattered. I simply copied her number into my own phone, committing it to memory, feeling a small spark of hope and control. It was a simple act, almost mundane, but it felt like a quiet rebellion. A first step toward reclaiming some piece of my life from the chaos Vanessa had thrown me into. When I set the phone back down, I exhaled slowly, the weight of the apartment's silence settling around me. Vanessa remained in the shower, oblivious, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had taken a small step forward. Not just surviving, but preparing to live on my own terms. The next day, while making deliveries and navigating the usual grind of apartments and doorbells, I finally took a quiet moment to send a text to Rose. "Hey, it's Rob. Just wanted to see how you're doing." Within minutes, her reply came. "Hey, I'm good. Just grabbing lunch. You?" At first, our conversation was light, just messages back and forth as I made my rounds. Small talk about work, deliveries, food, mundane things. But it felt like a lifeline, a thread connecting me to someone who actually seemed to care. By mid-morning, I was looking forward to each buzz of my phone, each small exchange, each tiny moment of laughter or understanding that passed between us in text. It was effortless, comforting, a break from the tension that Vanessa had imposed on my life. Before long, our messages evolved. We started meeting up during the day, usually at lunch, a small cafe near my route, a quiet park bench, even just passing each other in the office district. Each encounter was brief but meaningful. I could see her smile, hear her laugh, and for a few precious minutes, the chaos of my life, the humiliations, the stress, the constant presence of Vanessa faded into the background. Those small meetings became the highlight of my days, a reminder that not everything was lost, and slowly, ever so slowly, I began to feel that maybe, just maybe, a brighter chapter was starting to take shape. One afternoon, we met at a small sandwich shop downtown, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. Rose laughed at something a customer said as we waited for our orders, and I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't realized I was missing. "You know," Rose said quietly after a moment, leaning forward on the table, "you deserve so much better than Vanessa." I paused, thinking about the last 2 weeks, the way I'd endured her cruelty, the small spark of freedom I'd begun to feel after my talk with Rose. I nodded slowly. "You know what? You're right," I said, letting the words sink in. "Since me and her are basically roommates now, it doesn't matter what she thinks or does anymore." Rose smiled softly, her eyes lighting up, and for a moment, the weight of everything felt lighter. From that day on, our lunches became dates, small and unassuming at first, but meaningful. We laughed together, talked about life, shared stories, and slowly the connection between us deepened. One evening, I stayed over at her place. It was simple, just a quiet night, talking and watching old movies, but it felt like a small slice of normalcy I hadn't had in months. Back at my apartment, Vanessa discovered I wasn't there. She stormed around throwing a fit, muttering about how I hadn't told her where I was, how I wasn't paying her any attention anymore. Her voice carried through the thin walls, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and frustration. But for the first time, her tantrums didn't bother me. I had already taken back control of my life, and I could feel the distance growing between us, not just physically, but emotionally. Vanessa could scream, complain, or throw her fits all she wanted. It didn't matter anymore. I was no longer hers to manipulate. And as I looked forward to the next time I'd see Rose, a small, genuine smile crossed my face. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was living for myself, and maybe even starting to build something better. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a change in Vanessa, but not the kind I needed. She started falling behind at work, distracted, and irritable, and it wasn't long before she'd been reprimanded by her manager for a lack of focus. At home, the apartment slowly changed too. The men no longer appeared, the constant parade of humiliation ceasing as if she'd realized the damage it had caused. Instead, Vanessa threw herself into cooking meals every night, trying to fix things, attempting to act like the loving partner she once pretended to be. She asked about my day more often, tried to make small talk, even laughed at jokes she normally would have rolled her eyes at. But for me, none of it mattered. The bridge had already burned. The trust, the respect, the balance that had once existed, if it ever truly had, was gone. I could see her trying, but the damage had been done. It was too little, too late. I went through the motions, polite and civil when necessary, but I felt nothing for her anymore. She was no longer the person whose happiness dictated mine, no longer the one whose approval I sought. She was simply a roommate, a constant familiar presence in my apartment, and nothing more. Meanwhile, my days with Rose continued, bright and warm in stark contrast. And every time I returned to my apartment after a night with her, I felt a quiet, unshakable sense that my life had shifted irreversibly. Vanessa's attempts to reclaim me couldn't reach the part of me that had already moved on. After about 2 months of dating Rose, the time came to renew the lease on my apartment with Vanessa. I knew it was time to take the next step, fully moving on. I sat her down, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Vanessa," I said, "I'm moving in with Rose. You can either pay for the apartment by yourself or find a roommate. That's your choice." Her face turned red almost instantly, her jaw tightening as she tried to process what I just said. "What?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the apartment. "You can't do this. You'll regret this, Rob. You'll regret leaving me." I remained seated, unfazed, meeting her glare without flinching. Her words, once enough to make my chest tighten and my stomach twist, now barely registered. The anger, the threats, the tantrums, it was all noise to me. "You know what, Vanessa?" I said quietly, letting my calmness hit harder than any shouting could. "I don't regret anything. This is my life, my choice. I'm done letting you control it." She threw herself onto the couch, hands flying through the air as she screamed, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. But I didn't move. I didn't respond. I had long ago stopped caring about what she thought, and now the truth of that detachment hit her like a wall. For the first time in months, she realized that I wasn't coming back, that her attempts to manipulate, control, or guilt me were powerless, and I sat there, calm and resolute, ready to close the chapter that had cost me too much and step into something far better with Rose. Life after moving in with Rose was different, in the best way possible. The weight that had been pressing on me for months, the humiliation, the stress, the constant chaos, was finally gone. I woke up without dread, went to work without anxiety, and returned home to a place filled with laughter, warmth, and comfort. Rose and I spent our days together, sharing small routines, exploring the city, cooking meals, and laughing over things that didn't matter in the grand scheme of life. Every day with her reminded me that life could be simple, kind, and fulfilling. The bond we'd built over stolen lunch breaks, shared stories, and quiet confessions had blossomed into something real and unshakable. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life seemed to spiral. One day, her frustration boiled over, and she confronted Rose at her workplace, yelling and accusing her of stealing me. What started as a personal vendetta quickly turned into a scene in front of coworkers and management. Vanessa's anger, her inability to control herself, left no room for excuses. The confrontation didn't just embarrass her, it got her fired on the spot. Her reckless behavior at work had finally caught up with her. With no apartment, no job, and no one willing to tolerate her tantrums, she had no choice but to move back home with her mother, humiliated and powerless. For Rose and me, though, life couldn't have been more different. Free from Vanessa's manipulation and chaos, we thrived. Our days together were filled with laughter, quiet evenings, shared meals, and the comfort of knowing we had each other's backs. The nightmare of the past, the constant stress and humiliation, was gone. Every day with Rose reminded me that life could be simple, kind, and full of warmth, and as I looked at her across our small kitchen table, coffee in hand, smiling like she always did, I knew that the chaos of the past had led me here, to a life I truly deserved, with someone who genuinely cared, and a happiness that was finally mine. Life has a way of balancing itself out eventually. The chaos, the heartbreak, the people who try to drag you down, they don't get the final say. For me, the pain and the humiliation of the past months gave way to something better, something real. Rose and I built a life together that was warm, safe, and full of laughter. And as for Vanessa, the consequences of her actions caught up with her in the end. It's not always easy, and it doesn't always happen quickly, but if you keep moving forward, focusing on what truly matters, life has a way of setting things right. You just have to hold on, stay true to yourself, and trust that better days are coming. Thank you guys for watching this video and listening to the story. If you can, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It helps more than you know, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.